All right, welcome. This is 52SC, the special guest episode, right? And today you're going to learn the differences between diving, the natural environment, and reefing, an artificial environment. More specifically, how you can use that information to advance your tank. And we got to welcome Joe Caparatta here to share his experiences with us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
All right. Every fourth week of 52SC series, we're going to bring in somebody like Joe here who has done it before. Repeated successful tanks, farm scientists, biologists who have furthered their knowledge on caring for these animals. Joe, you fit that bill?
I think I do. I hope so.
How long have you been doing this?
35 years now. Crazy. Started at 13 years old, working in a fish store every day after school, and I haven't stopped. I just literally have never stopped.
35 years counts for something. So welcome, Joe, owner of Manhattan Aquariums, LFS in New York.
Yep.
Installer and maintenance, high standards there. Unique owner of uniquecorals.com, supporting farm for growing corals out for that facility. U.S. distributor Paneray, Pax Bellum, Triton, and also a partner with Mark over at Marco Rocks. Decades of working and being around all these animals. Okay, so of all those experiences, what do you think applies the most to today?
I think it's the aquarium installation aspect of New York City, running the, like you said, the high standards. We have very small footprints. We try to do magical stuff in small apartments where noise is an issue. You have 30 apartments below, so you cannot have any leaks, and just safe-proofing aquariums and making them aesthetically pleasing for people, as well as doing our farming, which we've done since 2006 at Unique Corals. So the farming aspects blended with the installation, I hope gives me the credibility to answer some of these questions.
So also the diving, man.
Yeah.
So you're a healthy, go and do a healthy amount of diving. You see the stuff in the wild and you bring back that application. It's a totally different thing.
And no matter how many dives you go on, it's almost like an epiphany every time. You're like, wow, this is what we're trying to recreate. Why are we doing it like this? Why are we using a little pump to create flow, which we'll get into, when you have these giant swells blowing corals back and forth? It's just super eye-opening, and I recommend anybody who wants to keep a successful marine aquarium to actually get out there and get wet, because that's what you're trying to replicate.
The best scripts I've ever written have been like on the beach. Go out, dive, see the animals there, and then bring it back. It's like just like, oh man,
you're dialed in, you're grounded to it.
Oh, I forgot,
Yeah. You forget the most basic things sometimes. You overlook them.
All right, so you can hear these answers to these questions today, which is first, where do you see corals thriving in nature? Maybe are there like different corals in different parts that you would find in nature? You're going to find, does flow really random in nature? We're going to answer that question. Is it really 78 degrees in nature? What's a thermocline? Also, how does the nature balance pests, predators, and aggression from conspecifics? What corals grow next to each other? And how often do we come across an actual mixed reef on a reef? Probably not all that often. What is marine snow, and how can we use that knowledge in a reef tank? We answer all those questions today. Start with number one. Where do you see corals thriving in nature?
So you go on a reef, you go diving, you see corals. Typically, you're going to see like corals together. So you might see a field of Euphyllia, and then you swim over this bommy, and all of a sudden you see giant plating Montipora or Acropora, and you start to realize that these corals have evolved to live in certain micro environments on the reef. Very rarely do you see this whole mixed bed with a Euphyllia here and a Blasto here and an Acro there. I didn't see my first Blastomussa. I was told if I want to see one, go diving on that rock wall. Once you hit 80, 90 feet on a vertical surface, that's where you'll see Blasto. And why? Why don't we see Blasto sitting next to the Acropora or the Monty? Because we stick them in our aquariums like that. Well, they don't thrive in the wild. Another thing to keep in mind is as these corals are reproducing in the wild and they're floating through the water column and they're settling, they don't know where they're going to settle. So a Blasto will settle on a reef, and it might live for a year, 6 months, but over time it's not going to thrive, and that's not going to be a habitat that's really inducive to the long-term survival of that coral. So naturally over time, you don't see a lot. You will see anomalies, but you're seeing really all of these corals where they do best, typically.
I didn't think about it that way. Basically, they're spawning, right?
Yeah.
And the 8 little million coral babies go out, and then they land wherever they land.
Yep.
But the only ones you actually see are the ones that landed in an area that, you know, really serves its species well. Right?
You will see them in spots that they don't typically do well, but you won't see a lot of them. And, you know, over time, you know, you might get a low tide and the blasto can't survive out of water, so that's going to kill it. Or you might get some crazy waves and it'll rip the flesh off it, that'll kill it. But the ones that are 80, 90 feet, deeper water, predictable flow, not as crazy, no bright UV light, that's a perfect little nursery for that blasto and the mechanisms that it's evolved to have to live in that environment.
This is a perfect example because I think back to that video I watched of Than. You know, like he's just like, these things like to live in the shade.
Yeah.
You know, like take your blasto and put it in an area that looks visually to you like it has no light.
Yeah.
That is where it's going to thrive.
Well, one thing we know Jake Adams here. Jake Adams had his reef builder studio at Unique Corals. I don't know if a lot of people know that, but when he packed up in Colorado, it was like 2015. He called me up and he said, Joe, I want a place to test all my really cool gear. People keep sending me gear and I have no place to test it. I'm working out of my home. So he packed up Subaru and he drove out to California and he set up shop at Unique Corals. And he was there for 2 years and we got to play with everything. And one thing that I remember that he told me is blastomussa, stick them on that rock wall. And not a rock wall in an aquarium, but we took egg crate and we created these vertical columns and we glued all the blastos. Because when the detritus settles on them, if it's too much, it could burn the blasto. You don't have enough flow to constantly take it off. So at this angle, it was perfect. They could still feed, they can grab marine snow or reef snow, and they thrived. They did great. So that's an application from the wild that we took and applied to our reef aquaria.
So one of the things I think of too is like, think about like a torch coral or your, you know, typical like flowy SPS or LPS coral, right? Big, huge polyps, you know. They've kind of adapted to an environment of lower light, you know, down deeper.
Yeah.
And part of the reason you know that is because it has this big, huge, fleshy polyp that if you brought that thing up to the surface, it'd just die.
Yeah.
You know, it cannot survive that turbulent,
That extreme environment.
You see it in our tanks.
Yeah.
Like they just don't survive well in
Right.
that turbulent environment. Right. But this is a coral that can survive high light.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can, you know, get these things to, you know, like be acclimated to, you know, the same range as SPS tanks.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I have them in my tank right now.
Yeah.
But you just can't have the same flow to it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so it's not necessarily that this coral like only likes dark light. It may, there's probably areas where you can find these things fairly shallow if the flow is right as well.
So that's another thing. We tend to think of our aquariums as, you know, the deeper part of the tank is like the deeper part of the ocean and the top part is like the top part. It's really not. You know, the difference in the ocean going from 30, 40, 50 feet down to 10 feet is so extreme. You know, it's you're not really replicating, even though our mind wants to feel like we're replicating it. You know, you might hit 800, 900 par on a reef at 5 feet underwater or something. You know, we're probably not going to do that to our torch coral. I mean, unless your light is right over it.
Yeah, I mean, we were testing par, and you're like out of the water, dude. You know,
It's
like
insane.
3,000.
Yeah.
Right. You know, one of the things I was looking at it, it's like, you know what? It is 3,000. But if we look at the area that's like, you know, valuable, it's the blue area, which is like only a third of that whole thing, and just wiped out all the yellow and green and stuff.
Right.
It's really only like 1,000 of like per. Right?
And that's high up.
Yeah,
Sure,
and then so
sure.
you get down in the deeper the water, but like, man, it goes down pretty rapidly as you go, and all the violet gets filtered out, and all the red, a lot of the violet and all of the red gets filtered out pretty rapidly.
Yep. Then you just have the blue penetrating deep.
So that's an important thing with all of these tanks that we're doing here is we're really thinking about where these corals thrive in nature.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so like I'm thinking this anemone tank here, you know, like what types, and some of the ones we're looking at, you know, basically get exposed at, you know, low tide.
Yeah.
You know, they're going to see a lot of really, really high par. They're going to see a lot of red. They're going to see a lot of violet, you know, like, because they're just, the water doesn't filter it out.
Yep.
There's a ridge there because they like to live on these ridges, and it's not sharp, you know, it's just not going to cut them as they're going around it, right?
Yep.
And like, there's all of these tanks, you know, at some point where you're going to hear it consistently, this coral's found at this depth, so we adjusted for this. Most commonly found.
Sure.
This coral's found in this environment, so we adjusted for
Muddy
that.
lagoon, you know, diving. I couldn't believe the Trachyphilia and the elegans corals in this kind of muddy, silty, you know, there's runoff, nutrients a little higher, there's a lot of minerals in the mud, and that's where these corals were thriving. So if you want to, you know, get a Trachyphilia, you touched upon something, the morphology tells a lot about the coral. If it's got a giant polyp, chances are it uses prey capture to get a lot of its nutrition. If it doesn't have a big polyp and it's got a big surface area like a disc, like a solar disc, well, it's probably trapping sunlight. But these corals, which have evolved in this desert-like environment, are feeding 24/7. It's just during the day they're using the sun's energy to produce the sugars through photosynthesis, and then at night they turn to prey capture. When there's no sunlight, well, why sit there for 12 hours? I mean, they got rent to pay, so they open up their polyps and they capture whatever's in the water column.
I got rent to pay. So think about that. I think one of the coolest things you can actually do is when you're thinking about a coral that you want to do, go to Google and search for either images or even better video of that coral in nature, and you'll see it living in its own environment. It's like, that's what it likes to do.
Yeah.
How can I recreate that?
Don't overlook it. It's staring you right in the face, literally. The answers that we tend to think of most of the solutions as exotic, but oftentimes they're so simple and they're right literally on a Google screen.
Yeah, especially you like you think of it. I have to dive, you know, which is a barrier. You know, that's an expensive trip to go do this.
And it's uncomfortable for a lot of people. It's cold. It's waves. It's pretty intense.
Or learn how to do it. All that kind of stuff. But I could just do it on Google. Okay, but notice the difference though of that, you know, versus in an aquarium. You know, like, and you see lots of pictures of these things in an aquarium. What you usually see, though, is the same kind of thing. Like, you don't necessarily see the best ways. You just see, like, what didn't die.
That's true.
And it's not real obvious either in the tanks sometimes, because a lot of times, like, really cool photos, they actually take all the pumps and stuff out of them, you know, because...
Especially with fresh water. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
They pull everything out, still water, they shoot, they even put the fish in just for the photo shoot.
I've seen lots of tanks where they're like super, super immaculate SPS tanks and stuff. And then what they do is before the shoot, they pull all the pumps out because nobody wants to see all those cords in this beautiful image.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which,
cheating a little.
Well, not only is it cheating, but it's giving like a misconception of how you actually support the biology in the sand. Like, and then they put them all back in, and it just looks like a rat's nest. So it's fun.
Well, that's where the designing aquariums and trying to really hit that that aesthetic standard is so important. And the gear that we had even 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I mean, when I started, if I wanted high-powered lights, I had to build my own canopy, and I used to. I'd make it out of wood, wrap it with aluminum foil, go get the fixtures, and use, at that time, we had fluorescent bulbs. We had Triton bulbs, coincidentally, which made meat look good in deli counters. And those were the bulbs that we put on our aquariums to make things look good. We had the Philips 03 bulb. If you go back to the late 80s, that was our blue, but everything was standard fluorescent. You wanted a wet dry, you had to make it. You wanted to hang on, you took a Super King and you put the, it was like we didn't have these pre-drilled tanks.
The word that comes to me, man, is like pioneer. I mean, you're using tools in a world that like this industry hasn't even developed yet. I'm using meat counters. All right, next question here is, this kind of flows into this actually, is flow really random in nature? Because in our reef tanks, we're always looking for like random flow or turbulent flow or whatever. Is it really random in nature?
So, yes and no. You have your flow on a reef, you have tides, right? So you have the flow coming in, and I credit this to Matthias. Matthias, the owner of Panther, really opened my eyes to this. Here we are replicating random flows, but it's really far from random. Sure, one coral is going to get pulses of water here and there, which is somewhat random, but the general direction of flow is 6 hours in, then a slack, and then 6 hours out. And certainly different reefs are exposed to different pressures of waves, like, depending on the channeling, it's going to move faster as the tide is coming in, and then it's going to move faster as it comes out. But now we can replicate that, is my point. These corals have evolved to be in an environment where the water's going in, and then it changes directions. It really does. So the detritus that settled might blow off, in this direction, but then you can't get it unless the flow changes. And we've got capabilities now in a lot of these pumps to recreate these tidal surges, these tidal flow patterns, by using multiple pumps, spinning the water one way, slowing it down, then spinning it the other way. You can actually have higher velocity at the surface using smaller, more pumps at the top, and on the bottom having more gentle flow to replicate the different flow patterns on the reef.
So this is so funny because, back in my day, I was like a little after you. Everybody was using like maxi jets, and then LT was like, if you were rich, you had a tunes, and then after that it was like the little maxi jet mods and stuff like that, and then you get a lot of flow in there. But like nobody had these fancy like reef crests and random flows and all this other stuff. But the way that it was taught to me to do it was basically what you just described, like on a different scale. But it was, turn the right maxi jet mod, which is like now it's like 2,000 gallon an hour pump, which was at the time to me it was like unfathomable because I had a maxi jet before, it was 200. Okay, turn that on for 20 minutes. And so I would just flow for 20 minutes that way, and I would just use a digital timer to do this. And then when this turned off, 20 minutes, this one would turn off, and then this one would turn on. And then it would go 20 minutes the other direction. And then at the end of that 20 minutes, both turn on and create a turbulent 20 minutes. So you create this gyrus, like a current, and then you're creating an alternating current, and then you create turbulence, but in like 20-minute pulses, not in like, whatever is random.
Ramping up 6 hours or chaotic. Yeah.
Okay, and then like it worked really, really well for me. I just have zero problems for that. It worked really, and now I apply that to a lot of the tanks here. It doesn't matter if I'm using a Gyre or Vortec or whatever pump, tunes or anything. Like I'm looking for the longest pulse I can find in these things in most cases. I want it to create a current, and it takes a while for the water to really start moving. In a direction. Like it ain't a 30-second pulse. This is like a 5-minute thing. And then let it stop. But in your case, what you're really talking about, like, man, we could go hours.
You could. I mean, if you want to replicate nature, which it sounds like we're all trying to do, and that's this topic, is recreating the lighting parameters, the feeding requirements of these specific animals, and the flow. You cannot overlook the flow. I mean, we talk about chemicals and microdosing and checking your trace elements and adding the proper supplements. I think flow is something that needs probably a little bit more attention if we want to really take it up the notch.
Okay, so this is one of those things where like people, debate, do you emulate nature? Do you emulate a successful aquarium?
Well, that's why there's no right or really wrong way. And there's plenty of examples where someone has just random, where they don't even have the 20 minutes, and the corals look amazing. And that is a testament to the coral's ability to thrive and adapt to environments.
I will say though, like if you look at those tanks where people didn't put a lot of thought into it and just kind of get lucky in the end. If you look at the beginning, at the end you'll say, awesome. But if you look at the beginning, you'll notice, you know what, man, there's twice as many frags in there as there is here. So it's really just the things that survived. It does look cool, man, but like half of everything died. Is that really the mission?
No.
So if you think about it though, this is why I want to push us a little bit, like understand the biology in this series and all the videos that we're creating is, all right, well, a lot of these surface dwelling corals, the corals that are like closer to the surface, I mean, they're exposed to a lot of turbulence. And it's different kinds of turbulence. I mean, I see a lot when I go out snorkeling. You'll see, closer to the shore where some of these corals are, is you'll see the tide come in, not that's necessarily the tide, but like the waves will bring all the water up onto the shore, and it's just pushing it up and you can see the current. You can watch the corals and all the detritus and like, reef snow and stuff go in one direction. And then eventually the weight of all that water gets too much to fight the incoming pressure of the waves. And all of a sudden it starts coming back. And you can see all the turbulence. And it's not like a thing that lasts 10 seconds. You can see all this turbulence for a period of time, but eventually the weight wins and the direction changes and goes back out to sea. And sometimes if there's areas in the reef where it can shoot out, that's where you get like your, like dangerous currents and stuff.
Riptides and whatnot.
But you can watch all of this stuff happen and then pay attention to the corals that thrive in this area And then also pay attention to the corals that would never thrive in that area that aren't exposed to that because they're way, way, way deeper and changing currents that happen over hours, not minutes.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, most of the reef crests are exposed to those tidal surges. Unfortunately, a lot of areas that are trafficked by a lot of snorkelers and divers have been trampled on. So, you know, you got to find your locations to really observe corals. Well, we're not going to get negative on this one, but some of the dive sites I've been on, it's so evident that, you know, well, this is a little public service announcement. Don't step on the corals.
Touch them,
if you're going to go diving, I've seen people, they don't know how to maintain neutral buoyancy. So they just wait and bottom out. And every time they bottom out, they're just breaking corals, slamming coral. Oh,
that's the nature of the beast of snorkeling.
Yep.
But like with the flow think for me, you know, like I'm thinking about this anyway. I am spending more time lately thinking about how do I create strong currents than how do I create random flow.
Yeah.
Are you guys doing that?
We're hyper aware. Well, we have the tools now to create very strong current, and the corals are thriving. I have so many people that say, "Oh my God, since I put this pump on, since I cranked up the flow, the growth is so much more." You know, you're delivering water, and water is the life that the corals need. You know, you're bringing nutrients to them. You're flushing out oxygen that the algae is producing. You know, especially under bright lights, if you don't have enough flow in there, corals can't get rid of that oxygen that the zooxanthellae are producing. So, you know, high light, high flow.
So that's one of the things I found, you know, with in a mixed tank where I want to put, you know, torches and stuff that, you know, like do not belong where I'm putting them.
Yeah.
You know, because it's sitting right next to an acro almost.
Yeah.
I gotta put like a lot more thought into the flow because that animal has got a lot of tissue, a lot of zooxanthellae. It's producing a lot of those excess oxidants, and it is not good for it. It will show you pretty rapidly. So I got to get enough flow to it to help it get rid of that, but not so much, man, that I harm the actual polyp tissue.
Right.
You know, so it's hard. You have to really think about it. That's the nature of like when you think about these mixed tanks. Is what I'm really trying to do is take this, you know, thing that's like does not want to live here.
Right.
Never would have populated this space, but I put it there.
Yeah.
Right next to this thing that is very different than the next one.
Right.
And the interesting part is we do it with all the LPS corals. We bring them up there and just assume. But you would never like take an SPS coral like an acro and like put it in 50 par and assume it's going to be okay.
Right. Right.
You'd never go the other direction.
Right. Right.
You know?
That's a good point. Yeah.
So very interesting. So flow, random in nature. Not really, more systematic.
Yeah, I think if you observe it, you'll see that it is more systematic. Absolutely.
You can make it systematic in your tank as well. Do it intelligently. Think about the animal's needs. Watch it in a video. And
you want gentle but strong. You know, you want like laminar flow. You don't want a garden hose piercing at the coral. When I've dove on mariculture farms where you do have euphilia in 30 feet of water, you know, those corals are in serious current. But it's somewhat gentle, so they're able to bend, and then they're able to bend the other way. It's not like someone just turns on a garden hose and rips the flesh right off.
It's just like so chaotic.
Yeah, right.
You can really watch it. Like you can watch it, it turns this way, and you can watch the water just like rushing over its surface.
The coral,
but it's not doing it in a way that's damaging it.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. Sure.
All right. Cool. Next thing here is. This is an interesting one. Is it really 78 degrees in nature? Because we're all told to do 78 degrees in our tanks. And what is a thermocline?
Right. So 78 degrees is a good temperature to shoot for. It's a nice average temperature on a healthy reef. But in reality, no. I mean, the temperatures, I mean, we look in the Solomon Islands, the coolest it ever hits in the coolest months is like 83. So those corals are sitting at 85, 86 degrees. Now, I'm not saying to replicate that at all. 78 is a safe number. But is it worrisome if all of a sudden your tank hits 76 or your significant other blasted the AC because he or she was cold and now the tank hits 74? Chances are the tank will be just fine. Thermoclines, when you dive, it is so evident that, oh, it's nice and warm here, and then suddenly you go down 2 feet or 5 feet, whatever, and it feels instantly colder, 5, 6, 7 degrees. You've got these natural temperature barriers where the cooler water is meeting the warmer water, and it creates this thermocline, this barrier, and as soon as you break it, it is so obvious. And these thermoclines are naturally moving up and down on the reef. And you've got, you know, cold weather and rainy, cold days, and the corals can adapt. They can go 70 all the way up to 80.
So it's like, I was talking to Than about this, and he shared an interesting thing I didn't think about. And we all know that like the light, takes out or the water filters out the red. But what it really is like the infrared light, which is heating up the surface water, right? But by the time you get down more than a handful of feet, man, there's no red light left heating it up. And there's also like all that turbulence has happened. It's not getting down, mixing with the currents that are lower. And so you get those areas. I mean, you can go diving and like feel it, like where your head is warm and your feet are cold.
Yeah, for sure.
So how does it apply to a reef tank? From my experience, as long as it's not happening like really, really fast, going cold, I've never seen like a real negative effect.
Well, we import corals, and a lot of times those corals are coming in at 62 degrees, 64, and those are some of the best shipments when the corals are actually, I take that back, 65, 68, the corals are doing fine. Their needs are less, they're almost in like a suspended state. If the water should hit 85 during a transit, during a shipment, a lot of, the mortality is going to be higher.
So for those, like it's thermal energy. So at lower temperatures, everything's moving slower. Everything's colliding slower. The chances for things to go wrong are just lower.
Their needs are less. Oxygen demands are less.
Everything is just less.
Yeah.
There's a reason, like, if you fell through the ice, you can actually survive for quite a while. Like they can revive you because everything just slowed down your body. Same thing with the opposite direction, though. If you get too hot, all of a sudden everything's colliding, thermal energy is going really fast, and all the biology is really fast, and things are going to go wrong really fast.
Very quickly. Yep.
So I see this in reef tanks all the time, where like we always tell people keep it around 78. I'm concerned if it's hitting 81 and stuff. Does that mean like everything's gonna kick the bucket at 81? Nope.
So there's another theory too. Like if you have really stable environments, very stable, your animals this is anecdotal, will possess less of an ability to actually cope with change when it does happen. So maybe it is more beneficial to let the tank swing a little bit, 76 to 79. I'm also sensitive. I run 2 stores in New York City and my store in Unique Corals. We try to take advantage of the different seasons. So in the winter, when it costs a lot of money to heat up our store, we run the tanks at 74, 75. In the summer, when it costs a lot of money to cool things, we run at 78, 79. So that 5-degree difference saves us hundreds and hundreds of dollars every month. You could do the same with your aquariums. If you're paying money to heat up the room, maybe your tank can run a little cooler.
There's a little bit of unknown biology here. Like I would assume that if you ran it at 74, things would just grow slower.
Yes, that is true.
Right? Just the biology is happening slower. But like how much?
But is that also our goal, is to just grow corals fast? Is that really the only benchmark of reef keeping? Is that the measuring stick for success?
Hey, by the way, all the bad things grow slower too. So the dinos and diatoms and stuff.
Plus you got to do more maintenance. You got to cut more coral. I mean, unless you're making money from it, maybe we don't need them to grow so fast.
Okay, so one of the points that you made though here is like you can go, was it the Solomon Islands? You're saying it was like 83 or something, right?
83, 86.
Okay, so that could lead you to believe like, oh, well, who cares if my tank's 83? This goes back to the previous conversation of the corals that you would find there are the ones that settled and survived. The ones that didn't aren't there. And in our tanks, we're not creating just Solomon Island tanks, man. We're taking corals that grow all over the place and, have evolved to different needs. And, I think in many cases we probably are doing that. And like, you see so many really successful tanks that are like kind of like the Solomon Islands. It's like, this is just what happened to survive my tank. And so I think that's that 78 is like, hey man, we're going to be right here because we know this to be a pretty safe area. It's like the average of the ocean.
Absolutely.
It's very unlikely it's going to be too cold to kill anything, and probably unlikely for a vast majority it's going to be too hot to kill anything either.
I like the 76, 77. It gives you a few more degrees cushion should there be, an issue. A lot of farmers like to run at 79, 80 even because, as you pointed out, it speeds up metabolism and the corals will grow and calcify quicker. Everything is just faster. But at 80, if you go 5 degrees too hot, now you're at 85. Now you're in somewhat of a lethal zone.
So this is one of those things too. Like I watched a video from Dana Riddle. It was like turbocharging growth, and he was talking about a variety of different things. But like part of it is like you can't just like put more fuel into an engine. You actually have to put more air into it, right? Because if you turbocharge any piece of this thing, it's it's gonna unbalance it all.
Sure.
So for your instance of like, hey, I want to, like, say I wanted a farm and I wanted to grow them faster, and I wanted to like run it at 80 degrees, all of a sudden now flow and gas exchange just became way more important because I have now increased the metabolism of that animal. It's creating more oxygen. It's, you know, it needs more carbon dioxide from the surrounding water. It needs everything. Like all these things are just happening way, way, way faster, and we need to replenish them faster as well. If we don't, you know, this is where biology goes bad.
You're running an engine at closer to red line. You know, it's a lot easier to blow it up if you're kind of maxing it out.
Well, that's one of the things too. People like, you know, try to get to like alkalinity and stuff. Like, should it be 13? Should it be 8? I can tell you, 13 is going to grow twice as fast. Like everything I've seen. If you had like a 13 alkalinity and a pH of 8.3, you're going to fill out your tank 3 times as fast as the guy that runs at 7 GKH and 7.8, maybe even more than 3 times fast. But man, are you riding the razor's edge, and your testing better be good. Everything better be great.
Yep. When you remove that limiting factor, I remember back in the day, we were all running it 12, 13, 14. Yep, those are the numbers.
There's no question. It just calcifies faster. We have increased the amount of carbonate that's available now as the scorsity.
It's also buffering pH more.
And the pH, I can get rid of the acidity that allows these things to combine. So temperature, this is an interesting one. We use 78 as a baseline, and if you had caught me in like, I think even probably 52 weeks of reefing number 1, I would have said stability meant, you know, hitting 78 and like, let's never vary more than 1/10 of a degree.
Well, so there is a lot of support for that argument. You know, corals have X amount of energy per day. Now they can spend that energy to adapting to micro changes in their environment, or they can grow. You know, and a lot of this is indicative by your mineral consumption. So I would theorize that if you did allow your temperature to go up and down every day, your consumption would be a little bit less. You know, that's kind of a metric or a tool to see how fast corals are growing. How much are they actually pulling out of the ion bank? How much calcium alkalinity? When things are really dialed in and things are growing, consumption goes up. You got to dial that doser up just to maintain a stable alkalinity and calcium. Oh wow, I got to add 20 clicks, 20 points to my doser. So any changes to that environment are probably taking away precious energy that could go to growth. But is that our goal? That's what I really want,
That's a great point, because like I use that same methodology all the time, right? So like, say you're like, okay, I heard the 10th of degree thing. We were doing that. Like, now a lot of these heaters actually have a 2-degree swing on them.
Sure, so they're not on and off, they last longer.
Yeah, it's going all the way down to like, 76 before it kicks back up to 78, right? And it lasts way longer. Okay, if you let it swing that way, you like heard this message, decided I want my gear to last longer, might be a little bit more efficient, variety of different reasons. Okay, so if you went and did that, pay attention to your alkalinity consumption. You have a stable dose right now that's working. Like, if all of a sudden you change it to that, and then all of a sudden the alkalinity of your tank starts to rise, it means the corals aren't taking up as much as they used to be, which is bad news. You just harm the biology, right?
Yeah, and you know your tank better than anyone, and no two tanks are the same. So what applies here might not apply there, and you have unique variables that are hard to control for in this crude experiment. But if you're seeing super stability and you are on top of your tank and you're intimate with it, and you see that just fluctuating your temperature or turning the temperature up a little bit yields, a drop in your alkalinity, and you got to turn up your consumption or on your doses, then it's fair to say that it probably was the temperature going up or down that caused that alkalinity change.
Inverse. If you just heard, the only thing you heard in here was, hey, if I went to 80 degrees, my corals are going to grow faster. Okay, if you did that, go and change it to 80 degrees. And if your alkalinity in your tank starts to drop, it means that the tank is consuming calcium and alkalinity faster than it used to. It's more rapid biology, more growth, and you're hitting the thing that you were thinking about. But at the same time, man, go add 20% more flow.
Yeah.
Like, put more thought into the flow, because you just increased biology.
Yep. Yeah, it's all got to go lockstep. I remember on our coral farms, we were running 12,000 gallons. They're 30-foot raceways, 2,000 gallons each at the former Unique Corals facility. And we ran T5 bulbs mixed with halides. And they say every 6 to 10 months change your T5 bulbs. And we would do that. And instantly we would have to turn our dosers up 20, 30%, because all that new light energy from a brand new bulb, same photoperiod, same spectrum, same brand, but our alkalinity would now drop with the same dosing. The only difference was that we had brand new bulbs, so the corals had more energy.
More photons coming out of those bulbs,
I'm growing more.
Splitting more of the carbon dioxide and water apart to create glucose. More glucose, more energy for growth, more energy for growth, more calcification.
More bone material.
Yeah,
Yep.
Is that
It's all
simple?
related.
And I saw it happen here too, the exact same way. The 160, we just added like 2 hours to the photo period, and
Alkalinity
boom,
dropped.
20% required dose had to go into it.
Yeah.
We had similar things with pH.
Cool.
All right, next one here was, this one's interesting too. So in nature, how does nature balance pests, predators, and aggression from conspecifics? So all the uglies and all of the predators and all the different tangs and everybody lives in the ocean just fine. How does that happen?
We have enough time to answer this one?
Yeah. Really.
This is a big one now. I think the answer is that nature doesn't have all the answers, but it sure is trying. And what we can learn from nature is if there's a problem, there has to be a natural solution, because there's nobody on the reef. Well, now there is, and biologists and trying to play the hand of God a little bit. But natural solutions, natural pests. And I love what you've done in your previous work, where you've demonstrated that. Maybe embrace the uglies. Maybe embrace the fact that we're never going to get all the pests and all the things we want. And is that a natural reef? Maybe there is a natural remedy that we could embrace that's really cool looking to eat some of these things. But getting back to the core question is, how does it balance on a natural reef? Well, there's a natural balance that occurs over time. Highly territorial fish have space to defend their territory. They don't always have to engage in damaging battles. In an aquarium, we're forcing them to fight because they can't escape each other. So I would put one territorial fish in a tank. In nature, you can have multiples, or create multiple hiding spots. Just simply having 3 different rock bommies would allow different groups of clowns to recognize, this is my home, this is your home, and this is your home. If you have one rock structure, well, one pair of clowns are going to say, well, this is my home, I don't know where your home is, so I'm just going to keep beating you into the corner. So, there are things that we can do in our aquariums to replicate that we see in nature, but on the small scale that is our aquariums.
Yeah, I see that definitely from the aggression standpoint. Like in nature, dude, if there's 2 tangs don't like each other, well, one of them's just out of here. Never see each other again.
Yeah.
You know?
And also how you add them, getting the smaller tang first and then adding the larger tang second also helps. There's a lot of tricks. Some people use the mirror technique. When I've added tangs to client tanks because I had to have them, we'll take a mirror and stick it on the side of the tank. So let's say you had a nasty yellow tang in there, and then you go in and add a purple, which they love to fight. You put a mirror attached to the side of the tank, and that yellow tank, every time he sees his reflection, he's attracted to that, and he winds up leaving the purple tang alone. The other is maybe we're getting off topic a little bit, I feel like it's useful, is putting the clear acrylic viewing cell inside the tank. And the fish are forced to get used to each other. Because these fish are, they have a surrounding, they have a comfort zone, and any change to that they have to react to. So if you give them time, a proper way to react to new things in their environment, they're kind of forced to adapt and in the best scenarios, be okay with it.
Okay, so, you're preaching the choir here, because this is, if you only heard one thing here, man, today, let it be this one, because this could save more animals than probably almost anything else. It's how you introduce these fish, because in the wild they would just jettison, they would leave, right? Yeah. But in the tank, when I put those conspecifics in there, they like the same food, look like each other, whatever. Okay, number one, on my 360 in my office, I have those things. I have a mirror that has like a Toons magnet cleaner on it, right? And it's for just this purpose alone. Okay. So you can just stick it right to the glass. But the first thing we do is I now use this. It's not an acclimation box. Maybe it's that. But
like a anemone box or something.
Well, I built my own, but it's not acclimation, man, per se. It's I'm spacing the word, but anyway, it's a plastic box that goes inside the tank, right? Okay. Put the fish in there, and the fish just lives in there for the next 3 weeks, and it'll look small to you, but it's just fine.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And the other fish will come and see it, and whatever. 9 times out of 10, after 3 weeks, you let it out. They never even just like a breeze. Nobody cares.
Yep.
Whereas if I just put it in there, man, they were gonna chase it around.
It.
Okay, this is a fish that used to live in the wild a week ago, right, or maybe 2 weeks ago. Used to swim around the ocean. Now it's been through all kinds of crazy transport. It's been through like FedEx, man, or UPS.
The chain of custody is insane. The lack of food.
And then I just like threw it in my tank and let these other guys bully it.
Yeah.
This is like bad outcome.
Yeah.
You see lots and lots of mortalities from that, right?
Yep.
Okay. If the only thing you did is just like go get this plastic box, I'm building them from Home Depot. You just go to, they have sheets of acrylic there, build it, super glue it. Everybody will tell you that you need to use fancy glue for
you don't care if
acrylic.
the joints don't look pretty.
Yeah, I don't care if the joints look pretty. It doesn't need to hold water. It's submerged in water.
Yep.
I just need like just glue it together and put it in there. Now it lives in this thing. It'll be just fine. And then one exception to that is if it's something like I know full well is probably going to go bad, like adding an Achilles to another Achilles. Well, if I go and I put that mirror on the tank before I let it go, the other one go, he's way more concerned about the mirror because it looks identical to him. It's the same size, everything. It goes so much better. This problem is just eradicated.
Yeah.
If only everybody knew.
Yeah.
And if only somebody would sell these damn things.
Yeah.
Because they're all too small. The ones you see, these acclimation boxes, they're just too small. Like for the purposes of most fish.
Yeah.
I wish somebody would build like kits. You could put like on little corners. And I could just go get it, snap it, and you put it together.
Now you got me thinking how you can incorporate that into the design of an aquarium. Some kind of slide thing in the corner of it that's clear.
Yeah.
So for the first 6 months you're using this clear divider in one corner, and then when you're done, the whole thing comes out, and it's got clips on it.
You and me.
There you go. All right, we'll do it.
Okay. All right. So also though, beyond that is the pests and stuff. Now this is a very unpopular opinion. I'm gonna say it anyway because I don't care. All right. So. And I've wavered. If you've been with me for 15 years, you've seen various versions of this. And okay. And part of it is out of like fear. But, pests, acro-eaten flatworms, nudibranchs, Monty nudibranchs, little red bugs, and all this stuff. They back in the day, if you saw one little bug, it was time to almost restart your tank. If you got one acro, man, it was man, now you're gonna take all your corals out, acro-eaten flatworm, and start all over, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I don't know, man. The 160 had acro-eaten flatworm, it had all of them, man. Just fine.
Yeah.
Well, it was not a big deal.
Yeah, I draw the line at the acro-eating flatworms. That to me, I've seen enough. I see man hours dealing with maintaining and dealing with where that's one pest that if you could really eliminate that one in there, you could deal with a lot of them in organic or natural ways, but they really slow growth. They really stress corals.
So here is the middle ground for me though on this question. Do I want to put effort into not introducing those things? 100%.
Yeah.
There's no question.
Yeah, this
Never
isn't
get
an
me
excuse to be okay and let your guard down.
No.
Right.
But if one day I find out they're in there, my methods just didn't work, or whatever happened.
Throw the tank right in the
garbage. It
garbage.
happens all the time. I now have an option of I'm going to remove every last shred of acro material out of there and go through some crazy system of trying to kill them all off, and making sure that they never find their way back in there, which probably has low success rates for anybody doing that for the first time. And actually has to have a system capable of supporting these animals.
Yep.
Another one, right?
Yep.
Or, I just accept that they're in there. I'm going to go get a handful of wrasses that eat these things, and then every 2 weeks, I'm going to take my MaxiJet or P-Mup or whatever it is, and I'm just going to go blow them all off.
Yeah.
Right? And as soon as they go in the water, the little wrasses will eat them all. And then, I'm going to go called overwhelmingly anecdotal, but the KZ stuff, that flatworm stop and the coral booster combo, I don't know. Nobody seems to really know how it works.
It works. It makes their tissues thicker and just gives them some kind of immuno boost. I don't know. because it is purely anecdotal, but the corals just seem to have thicker tissue to resist them a little bit more. They just look thicker. You know, like when corals get under attack, they look very thin and bony and they're on death's doorstep. Well, when you dose that stuff, which we do, it just seems to revive their tissues and makes them a little bit more.
I've heard this from
resistant.
So many fish store owners now. They're like, once they use it, they don't even care if you even have aqua-eating flatworms. I just want the tissue to look like that.
Yeah. You just start using it proactively.
Yeah, and so the combination of that, like, I've also heard it makes the tissue unpalatable. Could it be because it's like a bitterant, or could it be because it's thicker and harder to chew? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
It could be just that it's growing the tissue faster than they eat it. I don't know
who's eating these tissues to saying this one doesn't taste good and this tastes.
These are all theories that people are just throwing in the universe. You know, I don't know idea, but it definitely works. Like, I should say this, because I don't know how it works. It's hard for me to say that statement. But like, if my grandma came and asked me, man, like, what did I do about it? I would recommend serum for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll do this because
One
it
of the
works for me and
tools,
everybody I trust.
And what public aquariums do is they use fresh water and they'll put it on a garden hose like RO or regular fresh, and that osmotic pressure just makes the flatworms release their grip way easier. So what you could do is, depending on the system size, you could take a 1/4 inch, RO hose, put it in a bucket with a MaxiJet or a pump, and use that surgically, because I think a blast of RO water would make them release way quicker than just, salt water.
Okay, so both on the 750 and the 160, both had aqua-eating flatworms, and as long as we had the wrasse in there and we dosed the stuff, and then every 2 weeks or so, just grab a pump and blow them off. Not a problem.
And you've seen these reviews coming out how there's a species of camel shrimp from Australia that targets the eggs of the aquarium flatworms.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, so these camel shrimp, which we avoid for whatever reason, because we're not into camel shrimp, but these go down and they eat the eggs, and people are swearing that it's eradicating their issues. Then you got the adults being eaten through this treatment of freshwater blasting and wrasse consumption, and then the eggs getting taken care of by the camel shrimp.
Okay, I think of the same things. Like, I would never, ever in a million years put that Aptasia eaten filefish in there, because that thing is ugly.
Yeah.
But man, the right one.
Oh, they
just eat 'em
decimate
all
your
up.
anemones. Decimate it.
They just, like, they're not even there. They're a problem.
Yeah.
And tanks that are just like,
You're talking about anemones.
Yeah, little Aptasias.
Sure.
And so, it is, like, I would put that fish in there, especially like in an LPS tank where you're very likely to introduce these things just because they grow in the base of it and stuff, or even like zoanthid tanks and stuff like that. I just put it in there proactively so I never see one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, sometimes, they can develop a taste for similar corals, papales or zoanthids. Rarely, but we have encountered that once they develop a taste for it, it's like the old saying, once an alligator or a crocodile develops a taste for a person, they got to hunt and kill that one. It's a crude example, but you got to pull that one out. But I would say you take the chance, because on the flip side, you don't want your tank overrun with them.
Of course.
And it's so easy to catch.
If it starts eating, the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah.
Of course, if it starts eating the coral, take that one out and get a different one.
Yeah.
That's pretty simple.
Right.
Okay. All right. The next thing here is, I want to just hit 1 second real quick. On those pests, I do think you should do everything you can do to get them out of there. I think we should advance our dipping methods, because I think there's better ways to go about it. One of the ways I just keep hearing out of me is peroxide. This like not all, but a lot of the farms and wholesalers use a lot of peroxide.
Yeah.
Home users just don't.
Yeah.
Well,
it doesn't come in a fancy bottle, so we tend to select for the things that look like they're purpose-built for our trade. One thing that goes a long way is when you're buying corals, it's very easy to dip an acro and the adults fall off if you're using a proper solution, but it's really the eggs that are the problem. They don't react well to dips. In fact, you can't kill them with the dips. So what you want to do is just cut right above that tissue line, because the eggs are always just below the tissue line. It's a lot harder to do, say, with a mature colony where the tissues are wrapped around and you've got a lot of bone. So that's harder. But if you're only buying frags, it's very easy to just chop that thing right off the frag plug. Don't even use the frag plug. Just take it out and glue coral tissue that has been dipped. And if you do that well, there's a very low likelihood that you're going to introduce a flatworm.
I would never put a frag plug in my system, because I don't want to see that weird disc growth on the rock that's going to drive me
Right.
like the ADD is going to go off,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
not ADD, but it's going to go off.
OCD.
OCD is going to
Yeah.
go off. And you're going to see that weird disc growth underneath there.
Yeah.
So for that reason alone. But other than that one, I'd cut it out. I don't want anything that's on that plug in my tank.
Yep.
Because there's nothing good on there. There's going to be weird little microscopic algae that are going to become not microscopic real soon.
Yep.
All kinds of different things. But we actually dipped some macros in like an 8-to-1 solution of peroxide, and you're stressing your corals out. So like, know that you're probably gonna lose some color and stuff on these things, but your goal is, pests in this case, like on corals that are, hard to cut off all the base.
Yep.
It's a colony, and so in that case, we actually saw the eggs in the solution. So you dip it for just a matter of like, we count to 5, swish it really, really hard, and then pull it out. And I don't think it'll get rid of all the eggs, man, but we definitely saw the eggs.
Oh, the eggs were falling off from it. Yeah.
Yeah, they were in the bucket, man, for sure.
I wonder if that's due to the violent shaking or a combination of the peroxide working and softening it and the shaking. But deep inside these larger colonies, I don't.
The adults would pop off immediately. We would put them under a microscope, and you could watch the thing dissolve before your eyes, man. The little bubbles all over it and just whoosh, gone. The corals, some of them browned out for sure immediately. They're coming back. But things like the euphyllias of the world, the acans and the micromusas and the zoanthids. I mean, I've dipped these things in 100% peroxide, for 2 minutes, which is essentially a freshwater, super high oxidant dip. And like tomorrow, they look better than ever.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Well, why am I using tea tree oil? And all the algae's gone.
Yeah.
Everything, man, is gone.
Yeah.
And so I think there's ways as our hobby to evolve it. Now, the problem is we have to get that evolved at scale. So I think of it here as we would have to go and get 60 different euphilia frags and dose 5 of them in various forms of things and then, track them. This is a big project.
Yeah.
Or you guys got to do it at scale.
Yeah.
And you have to be okay with some of this stuff is not going to make it for the betterment of everybody that comes after.
Yeah.
Which
this is what advances the hobby, experimenting. There's people, I don't know if you're aware of it, but that dose bleach into their tanks. Have you heard this one? I've been doing it for years. Sodium hypochlorite, whatever it is. You just dose a little bit, and in theory, it's supposed to sterilize the water column. Not enough to harm or shock your corals, but enough where if you take a water sample and study the bacteria that's laden in the water, you'll see a lot less bacterial strains. And the theory, anecdotally, is that you're going to reduce the odds of STN and RTN because you're sterilizing the water column, making it easier for the coral to not have to constantly fight off some of these bacteria.
So to bring us back to the original point here of how does nature balance these pests? The reason that you have these things in the tank, the flatworms and all that stuff, is because they're in the ocean.
Yeah.
That's where we got them from, right?
Yep.
But they weren't a problem there because there's all these reefs here. It's because there's all these wrasses, there's flow. And one of the things we've seen in our tanks too is the acros that are in the direct line of the pumps are the ones that don't have problems with the aquarium flatworms. It's the acros that are sheltered or shaded from the flow that develop the problems because nothing getting them off.
Yeah.
But in the ocean, man, currents and turbulence and predators and all that stuff they all work in balance with each other.
Yep. Some shrimp, a 6-line wrasse, all the different things that are going to help to naturally eradicate these things from our aquariums.
So put those things in your tank to fight them.
Yep.
Sometimes if you put them in there in the beginning, you'll never even know you had this problem.
Yeah.
For instance, the Monty eating nudibranchs.
Yep.
Right? So we had, a plague proportion of those in the 160. We threw in a 6-line wrasse, gone. I'm sure they're still in there, man, but you never saw them again.
Yeah.
Amazing. So what am I going to do? Take them all out and quarantine them or whatever? Or I throw a fish in? Yeah, throw in this predator.
Yep.
So find balance in those things. The next thing here is, all right, what corals grow together next to each other in nature, and how often do you come across a mixed reef in nature?
So yeah, I mean, when you're diving, you will find areas, and these are usually the places you want to take pictures, where the acro field will meet the Monty, and then you've got some nice sarcophyton, the leathers in there. So it does happen, but more likely, almost always, you find fields of one coral. And when they do coral studies and they look at a brand new reef, let's say a cyclone or something comes in and just devastates a reef. Now you've got this prime real estate that's perfect for settling. All the corals that are up current will settle on that reef. And you might have 500, 700, 900 species of corals for the first couple of years. And then over time, you'll peak out. I remember reading this one study. It was like 1,000 different species within like 1 hectare. And then over time, they saw that it went down to 800 and then 600 as the faster growing corals were typically more aggressive. They can outcompete and sting the other ones. Over time, there was like 30 species left on this giant reef. It was sarcophyton, it was the fastest growing acropora, and the montipora that just shaded and killed everything else until the next storm or natural event comes and wipes the playing field clean again. So that's typically what you see, is you're seeing the fastest growing corals in that one area. But then when you go deeper, you might see a little bit more of the mixed beds, Euphyllia mixed in with the deeper, less light-loving acropora. So I think to get back to this question is when we go to a store and we want to buy corals, we're not buying with that mindset at all. We're buying on what is attractive to us. Oh, I want one of these. It's like a buffet. I'll take 2 of these, 3 of these. But that's not at all how it typically is in nature. Yep. Their needs are so different.
Okay, so mixed tank, #1 most popular reef tank by far.
Yeah.
Not on purpose. It's because when you started shopping, it did just what you said. I don't know, that one looks cool. Yep. I want the yellow one. I want the green one. Yep. I want the blue one. You know?
Yep.
I don't know, that one's tissue's kind of cool. And you put it, you don't bring it back to the house and put it in the place that it would thrive in because you understand its biology. It's like, oh, I think it would look good right there. You know?
Right.
And I did that with the blasters in my first tank.
Yeah.
I mean, I kept trying because they were one of the corals that I really like. And I just kept trying to put them in the place that there's the best viewing.
Yeah.
And it just didn't work out well for that animal.
Yeah.
I should have put it where actually it's kind of hard to do it, but it would have stayed alive.
Yeah.
And so this is important because everybody who's watching this, who's really into this, understands, man, that in almost every way, a good mixed tank is so much harder than an SPS tank or an LPS tank or anything where I'm actually, looking for the biology of this certain group of animals.
Yeah. Lighting requirements, flow requirements. You're always going to, I don't like to speak in absolutes. It's very common to have always 1 coral or 2 corals not thriving and not doing so well. And that's kind of become the norm for a lot of people, but maybe it doesn't have to be like that. I have a lot of friends in public aquariums, and there's always one species that's challenging in that tank. And it's probably environmental rather than, that coral is just because why can this public aquarium keep Seriatopora, but in this public aquarium, they just can't. Well, it's not the right setup. Maybe it's not the right flow or the right lighting, or just something is missing.
That is the piece that I hope really comes through in the 52 SE series is stuff doesn't just die, man.
Yeah.
That's the way that we've treated. I don't know, it just died. I don't know, chromis just all die. I don't know, the anthers just all die.
You can't keep a school of chromis, yes, you can.
Yeah, no. I mean, you're just starving it to death.
Yeah.
It's a super active fish that eats all the time, man.
Yep.
And somebody told you that it's okay to feed every other day once 2 pellets. I don't know, man. It's going to die, and hungry people fight with each other.
Yep. And just like we look at the morphology of corals, look at the swimming patterns of the fish. If the fish is swimming up on a reef and it's constantly doing this in all the videos and all the dives you've ever done, you watch Anthias, what are they doing? They're not sitting there. They're plucking stuff out of the water column constantly. This is food, this is food, this isn't food, I'll spit it out. This is food, this is food, this isn't food, I spit it out. We need to replicate that in our aquariums if you want these corals to thrive. These fish to thrive.
Oh yeah, I got a whole school of them, man, in my tank.
So all they want to do is just feed.
I feed every hour, man, on the hour during the day.
And how do they do? They probably do well.
They're growing, not dying.
Right. They're thriving.
Yeah. I just had to think about the animal and its needs. So that's one of the things the biggest advancement our hobby could have is not just think about all fish as a fish.
Mm-hmm.
They all eat the same thing. They all eat the same frequency.
One giant brush stroke. It's not like that.
Yeah, that's like saying a horse and a cat's the same, dude. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, they're just all just totally different. Or even a rabbit and a cat. They're like totally different animals.
Two furry things that I've never really thought about before. Shouldn't they eat the same thing? No, not
even close.
Not even close.
We'll get into that throughout the series, but like it is, if we could get to that, and even within the corals. So like I was writing the LPS tank, or the flowy stonies tank, the other day, and you know, I ended up calling it a, you know, like more or less an LPS mixed tank, which is not a term that I've really used before or heard, because what I'm really doing is mixing, you know, probably upwards of 100 different types of coral. They all might be large polyp stony coral, but they all have very unique biology needs, and they're going to live in totally different areas. And if I think about it, they'll be way more successful.
Yeah.
I mean, let's just thinking about the difference between, again, the blasto and even something that looks a lot like a blasto, like the micromusas.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
I mean, I can get a micromus to live in a lot of different areas. I will tell you, they tend to look better in lower light areas. They tend to keep those like rainbow colors and stuff.
Well, when you dive in Australia, like near the Lord Howe Islands where they're from, you can get a colony and the rainbow is tucked underneath the rock, and then the red and the more generic greens are facing the light. Same colony, just the color shifts almost to a rainbow as you get under less light. I've had people say they throw acans in their sump, and all of a sudden, a month or two later, they're rainbow.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I can understand that now.
Yeah.
Like now that you've heard that, would you ever take your super expensive rainbow and put it on the top?
No.
Never.
Right.
You would never. I want to maintain that color, so I got to find an area that serves its not just its biology, but like the biology that I want it to display in a display tank.
And it's a constant balance between, well, it might do well for 3 months, but what about 3 years? What about 6 years? You know, what is the test of time? What is the measurement of time that really determines if that coral is happy and thriving? Just the fact that it's holding on or it lived for 3 months didn't mean you might have been doing it right. It just meant the coral was strong enough to adapt to hold on for that long. But we want these corals and fish to thrive. We want to create microenvironments within this tank that really caters to the needs of the animals that we're trying to keep.
I don't know if the hobby's ready for this leap yet, but like the one that you just said is the one that will be the great leap forward, man. Like this will be the thing where like it'll transform all of it. If we could just get past the mentality of like it didn't kill it in the next 15 seconds.
Yeah.
I mean, that's Drano. That Drano does that.
Right.
But like it died in a year. It means I was doing something wrong for an animal that would normally live decades.
Yeah.
You know, I was doing something wrong. I just wasn't doing it so wrong that it killed it immediately.
Yeah.
Now, and
it was
like
a slow decline. Yeah.
It's really hard to think about it like in a coral that way. But like, what if my puppies were dying within 12 months of every time I was getting it? Am I doing something wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I'm doing it, and it's really sad.
Right. And it could have been something simple, just a slight diet switch, changing a diet or something, or not feeding just the right foods. You can keep it for a year or two, but it should live 10, 12, 14 years.
So here's the balance in that equation. Is like, what I don't want to do is like go out and shame everybody. Like, hey, you killed a coral, shame on you, right?
And that's not the goal, yeah.
No. What it is though, is if we can embrace that, I was probably doing something wrong, and go looking for it, and as a hobby, we could learn what that thing is.
Yeah.
We can stop that for all the future people and be really, really proud of what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so it's not about, thinking you're a crappy reefer or any of that stuff. It's about how do we do it better, and in order to do it better, we have to accept our faults.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we've advanced the overall big picture of reef keeping. I mean, look at where it's come. We had wet dries on reef tanks in the 80s and very low power lights. And now we're breaking apart the different tools of success, the water chemistry, the flow, the dietary needs, the lighting. And within those, we're opening those up, and we're understanding spectrums, intensity, PAR. And within either of those, we're saying, well, how long do we want this intensity? At what depth do we want this intensity? So we're constantly trying to advance through understanding in finer and finer detail. And just like these, like if I can use the car analogy, to get a lot of horsepower out of a car, yet also be compliant with fuel standards and carbon emissions, takes constant refinements and refinements and refinements. But look at where we are today versus in the 80s. I mean, we're light years ahead. So, when somebody comes into my store and they're like, is this alive? Is this a plant? You want to almost laugh, but they don't know. These are adults that don't know that this coral is alive and it's not a plant and it's living. And so there's this huge education gap that we as stewards for our industry need to we need to step up and teach them and give them this crash course and then send them home with these animals. So a lot of the people probably watching this are new at keeping aquariums, and there's a wealth of information you got to take in. But I think the takeaways are understand the animals you want to keep, learn more about their needs before you go to the store to buy them, or go to the store, fall in love with them, and then go home and research them to make sure that you have the right setup or that you can afford the husbandry time that's involved, the right equipment, everything that goes in, because they're pets at the end of the day. They really are.
So I'm just going to own that I don't know if the brand new reefer is ready for that, but the intermediate reefer who's going to do this for the second time absolutely is.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the things I think about in terms of the conversation you're just sharing of like the little bits and stuff, and then we learn, we get better and better, is I was talking to Jay over at Ecotech. And at one point, we were talking about how long it's kind of taken for LED lighting to catch up, right? And what he said was interesting, which is like, look, man, it took all of the lighting this long to catch up. Like, think about the first time you did a fluorescent bulb, how long it took to develop to the point that we all adopted the ATI like Blue Plus model, right?
Yeah.
That was a decade, man.
Yeah.
And it's taken a decade for LEDs to catch up. But now that we know, like, if we adopt it as a whole, we could either use the spectrum analogy you shared. I could pick one that just does royal blue LEDs and cool whites and only hits chlorophyll C2. There's one really specific energy band. The eye can't really see the difference all that well.
Right.
Or I can pick one that balances violet with indigo and light blue light that very much mimics the type of light that would, hit the ocean or the energy band, the blue energy band, and then also hits all the energy segments of chlorophyll A, C2, the carotenoids, predenin, and like biologically makes sense. Why are we still doing this royal blue thing? Like who and why was anybody not like let's just abandon that, man. That way it should be done.
Yeah.
We shouldn't have to talk about that anymore.
Yeah.
So hopefully out of this series you'll get that. All right, this one's an interesting one too. This is an ocean. Now, this one's a pet peeve of mine. So come along for a ride here, because I'm glad you brought this one up. Right? Different between the ocean is what is marine snow, and how can we use that knowledge in a reef tank? I'm going to hold my tongue on the add-on piece I'm going to add on to this, but go for it.
One of the biggest epiphanies for me, maybe the first time or the second time I went diving, was, wow, there's so much silt or particulates or marine snow or reef snow, whatever you want to call it, in the ocean. It very rarely, and you see it especially when the sunlight shimmers through, you just see these fields of silt lines, and it's all this stuff in the water column. Well, these corals and animals are using it, they're preying on it. And by definition, marine snow is all the organic waste of the decaying plankton, the fish, anything that dies settles down to the bottom of the ocean, and it's called marine snow. And bacteria plankton actually encapsulate this marine snow, and they start breaking it down. Well, corals, when scientists have studied their gut, they're filled with bacteria. They're consuming the organics that are in the water column that are wrapped around by this bacteria. So that's a food source for these corals. Reef snow is on the reef. Marine snow is a general term for the organics that settle to the bottom of the ocean, and what doesn't get consumed forms the ooze that's on the bottom of the ocean floor. But what's the takeaway, and how can we adapt and learn from this in our aquariums? Well, we love crystal clear water. We don't want to see dirt in our water or particles, so we love to attack it by adding more and more filters. With the advent of filter rolls, now we've got the tool to really filter all that out. But what are we really doing? Are we creating an environment that's pleasing for us to look at, or are we creating an environment that the corals will do well and thrive in? I think the hybrid approach is what's best, using a micron count or a micron size that doesn't filter all of it out, or maybe using it part-time or only on part of the water that's entering the filter, so some of it can escape and go up, or like the Triton method that doesn't employ any mechanical filtration. In fact, it allows for this process by allowing detritus to run through an algae bed where organics can get broken down and coated by bacteria. Some of it gets pulled out by the skimmer, but a lot of it goes back up into the tank. And successful Triton method tanks often have this reef snow flowing through it, but the corals are thriving because they can eat 24/7, or a lot at night when they're doing their prey capture. So, don't over-filter your aquarium. Try to replicate that which we see in the wild. That's the takeaway, I think.
This is where this conversation evolves for me, and like hopefully again, 52 here, SE, we see this conversation's happening, it's just not happening enough at scale. And it's the difference between organic and inorganic nutrients, right? So organic nutrients is the marine snow, and like really 8 million things, man. It could be fish turds, it could be the bacteria, it could be
broken down
whatever, man.
Decaying fish or
coral. Tree falls in, whatever. Like just stuff that's breaking down and can be consumed as energy. So in our tanks, you see that, and we can create more of it. And there's foods and stuff that you can dose for it. Some of them liquid, some of them powder. But like what the WWC share with me is, they're feeding on the hour every hour. Because their solution is, essentially fish waste, and that's like, you think about how the chromists like live within the coral, they're eating and then they're like pooping right there, right? And it's readily available.
The waste is delivered to the coral heads.
Okay, so that's where they're getting amino acids, fatty acids. The coral doesn't have to synthesize it on its own, saves the energy from that. It's also getting sources of nitrogen and phosphorus, organic nutrients. And then there's this thing of inorganic nutrients, which is nitrate and phosphate. And there's been this shift in our hobby to like somehow think that tons of inorganic nutrient or inorganic, meaning like really high levels of nitrate and phosphate are good for the tank or something. Like that's really unnatural. And I won't deny that like some tanks definitely survive that and maybe even thrive in it. That's far cry from the ocean. Even the dirtiest lagoons don't really have high nitrogen and phosphorus. They just have high organic nutrients. And so we couldn't really do that in the past, though. You would have, if you dumped all those powder foods in there, you just have algae growing out of everywhere, and your inorganic nutrients would be through the roof, and it'd look like trash. Okay, but now like filtration's gotten so good. Like the filter roller, man, like
super efficient.
Too good. The skimmers now, borderline too good. The refugium, show me anybody that has an active refugium that has any nitrate and phosphate. They're like end
if
game
it's
solution.
a good size refugium that's running well,
I found even small ones with high powered lights. Like the problem would be no nitrate and phosphate, but I don't really care about nitrate and phosphate at all, because in the ocean that doesn't is undetectable, right? And vast, even some of the dirty lagoons. But what I do care about is making sure that there's enough of the marine snow or organic nutrients. And so you can look at that from a bunch of different ways. It could be from how often you feed. It could be from, the fish that you have in there. It could be from using things like, reef chili or whatever powdered one you want. Okay, amino acids, I would later find out that I didn't know this, but like the corals actually have an active transport method for catching the amino acids out of the water. They have a electrical charge on an opening that attracts the amino acids out of the water. They capture it, and then they open up a valve essentially on the other side and let it into the tissue. Right? They were designed to do this. And then when you use like that Red Sea stuff, that because you can see it, it's like fluorescent, right? You can see it's just coating the tissue of it, and now you know the active transport method of it's pulling it in. Okay, well I don't need to see it, so the ones we use here are the Brightwell one, the coral amino. I'm just emulating the success of Worldwide.
Yep.
They told me to use it,
Yep.
and then we did an experiment here and absolutely transformed them. So I'm sold.
Mm.
There's other ones I'm sure you could
Yep.
use, but I mean, Julian's
Acropower.
Acropower.
Oh, yeah, we love that.
Yeah.
See all the coral, the colors just within a week or so, the colors are just thicker and vibrant.
That was the part I didn't anticipate. So what we did with the coral amino is you had all these like corals that were unhealthy.
Mhm.
And, some of them you could almost see the skeleton through, and the colors are crappy. All of a sudden, man, it just brought all of those corals to life. All of a sudden, the tissue got puffy and healthy. And what I didn't expect is all the the color came back to it.
Yep.
And versus the AB, the ones that weren't getting it, night and day. Nobody see if you saw that in real time. Oh, like that little $10 bottle, y'all never not use you.
Well, I remember Julian saying, the corals can't synthesize some of these aminos. They have to be added. So, by adding them, now you're replicating what's a natural occurring thing in the wild. And the proof is in the pudding.
Okay, so but by adding them, though, you can add them via meaty foods and fish poo and stuff too.
Yeah.
So like if they're half digesting in little particles and they capture it, and they either digest it right on their tissue or use their mouths or whatever.
Some of the best reef tanks have a lot of fish. They're managing their nutrient export, but they're feeding very heavily. And the byproduct, like you said, of all those foods, whether it's nori, look how many trace elements in iron and iodine is in seaweed. If you got tangs and you're feeding them seaweed every day, well, what do you think happens to all those trace elements? The fish are only using some of it for their biology. Well, the rest of it is going into the system.
So this is that piece where I hear this all the time where people are like heavy in, heavy out, and the people that know, right? And then there's people that come in and argue with them like, well, why would I want to pollute the tank with heavy in just to take it back out? No, man, I'm putting tons of organic nutrition into the tank. And then what I'm taking out is all the inorganic pollution, being nitrate and phosphate. Like tons of nitrogen and phosphorus in the organic nutrition that is very natural and you find in the reef. And what I don't have is the pollution of nitrate and phosphate. We'll be debating this one forever, man.
Right.
Because you can be successful a variety of ways.
Exactly, yeah.
But
you got to find what works for you. Yeah.
One of these certainly sounds right.
Right.
I don't know. And then
has less pitfalls, less mines to step on, I think, too. If you can create a husbandry or a goal or a system that doesn't employ very high nitrates and phosphates. Yeah.
So it's worth saying, though, that even I'm using Worldwide as an example here, but they run 20 nitrate and way hundreds of thousands.
0.1 phosphates and
low phosphate.
10 to 15 nitrate. So we try to keep it at that 100-to-1 ratio.
So that is actually kind of hard to do without chemicals because most of the time when you're adding food, now this is a shooting from the hip here, it depends on the food that you're adding, but it's probably not super far away from this. When you put food in, it's actually adding it around 10-to-1, especially if it's sea-based foods. So you're adding, for every 1 nitrate, you're adding 0.1 phosphate. So if I got to 20 nitrate out of it, I'd be at 2 phosphate. 2, not 0.2.
Right.
And so you end up, if you want to allow the nitrate to get that high, and we keep that, now I'm running GFO, I'm running lanthanum chloride, I'm running, MaxSpect has a resin that we've been using pretty successfully lately. But I had to use all these chemicals. But if I run a refugium, it just keeps low. It's really low. Potentially 0.0. But what I wouldn't want to do is have 0.0, nitrate and phosphate, and then also use the paper.
Okay.
Use the roller.
Yeah, you'll strip it right out.
0 organic and 0 inorganic nutrients. Bad news for a coral tank.
Yep. Some of the best tanks I've seen run these very low levels of nitrogen and phosphorus, but you're riding a razor's edge. So as a coral farmer, we're relying on different staff. The very safe measurement seems to be, 5 to 15 ppms nitrate, very stable. You want that nutrition in the water, especially with the higher lights.
So in this series, you're actually going to see this thing where we're going to see just consistent throughout the whole series. We're going to approach filtration, you're going to approach nutrition intentionally. We're going to put nutrition in here in a very intentional manner. And then we're going to remove it so it doesn't pollute the water. And the method we're calling is SPDID. So I want to suspend it with flow. I want to remove the dissolved organics, not always. I wanted to remove the particulate organics, the dissolved organics, the inorganic nutrients, and then dilution through water changes. But what you won't see is I'm going to apply that universally to all tanks. But like something like the Predator tank, I don't need nutrients in there. Nutrients is only serve growing algae and slimes and stuff. So I'm going to use all of them. I want the lowest maintenance tank possible. That's part of the reason I set this tank up that way. Is like it's fish only. I don't, my life, work-life balance. Right? So I'm gonna get all of that out, right? And there's a lot of food going in there. Like this eel's gonna have a big turd. You know, like, I mean, you won't think of it eating that frequently, but it's eating a lot more than 1 cube of mysis a day effectively. Right? Okay, so like I wanna get all of that out, so I'm gonna do all of it. But on something like the Chromis tank, nope, I'm not running paper. I'm not going to run the roller or a filter sock or anything. I actually want all of that organics in there. But I'm certainly running the skimmer and I'm certainly running the refugium. You know, so thinking about it more in terms of, do I need a skimmer? Do I need that? The biology of the animal and the goal of what you might even have.
We see in freshwater aquariums, which I'm also very into, is these biotope aquariums, where you're replicating the plants, the lighting, the driftwood, the rocks, and the fish of a certain location. If you go back to like Takashi Amano with the Nature Aquarium days, he was known to go to different areas and photograph different locales of lakes and the juxtaposition of the waterfall with this rock and this plant and the way the light hit it at 4 p.m. And he would recreate that in his studio, which I was fortunate enough to visit. We never really, we haven't adopted that biotope recreation of a specific locale in Reef Aquaria that much. I see it happening. I see this series. I see Ryan talking about it. Everyone's more aware of it. We can do more than just this mixed garden reef. And what that entails is picking your animals, picking your environment, picking the lighting, and then fine-tuning your filtration to support the best chance of success for those needs.
You ready for blasphemy?
Yeah.
I mean, just total, complete blasphemy.
Yeah.
Than said it to me, which is, we could learn something from freshwater.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And like, dude, in freshwater, you pick a theme, you pick an animal you want to surround that theme around, and then you create this like very intentional look, and you hard commit to it. It's not just a collection of animals in there, right? Which is like, we've all seen that. We've all done it 100 times, right? What's next? And I hear this out of people all the time. I go to shows all the time. It's like, what's next? You know, I've done it all. I've done the SPS tank. I've done the LPS tank, which are all like, you know, basically just collection tanks. All right, well, what's next? And
the
next,
reef ledge, the NPS, you know.
It could be like another species. It could be another look. Like, so like with the Twilight Predator tank, it's not just a predator tank. We were looking for something very specific, like a actual look to this tank. I want it to have this spooky look. We're using black sand for a reason. You know, it needs to. When somebody comes into your house, they have to just like, you know, for lack of better words, bypass your wife and go right to like, what is that? You know.
So you know, it comes into the conversation of what people are going to do what they want, and I think a lot of people are going to still gravitate to the mixed reef because it offers them the diversity, the color, the nuances, the unpredictability, I can just keep adding all this random stuff. And so I don't think that's ever gonna go away, but it would be awesome to have this conversation piece where this is a locale from this reef, kind of like a public aquarium. Might be a little bit more boring because there's not as many angles, there's not as many things happening. It's like a snapshot of a locale. But I think it lends itself to a better conversation, a better story, and we can probably care for the animals better. And it really comes down to your individual decision. You know, we're not telling you what to buy and how to, you know, it's your money, it's your tank. You have to look at it, and there's no right or wrong. But we want to tell people that there's so much more than just a mixed garden reef. Like, you can go to the left, you can go to the right, you can recreate what they're doing on a larger scale in public aquariums.
It requires inspiration.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's not good enough to say, go do some more fun stuff.
Yeah.
Like, show me.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
and
show me how to do it.
You know, I had, after I shared that with like my little circle of friends, like Twilight Predator, I shared the video, and they're all like, wow, man, I never even thought of doing something like that.
Right.
They're like, I want to do that. And it was like, I just needed somebody to show it. Like in my life, like balance. So like, this seems like it would actually fit and it's cool. And like one of them literally the next day, man, went out and set up a frogfish tank. You know,
awesome.
like it was just the inspiration, man, that you needed.
And they're easier to maintain because everything is geared for that specific biotope, for that setup. Yeah.
Well, if you do it that way, the decisions become so obvious every time you enter something.
Yeah.
You know, and like, so some of the comments you saw in the first video is like, that's the most over-engineered tank known to man. Like I hear what you're saying because we're putting way more thought into it than anybody else is like really put thought into it. But like, isn't that the evolution here?
Right.
You know, isn't it like, how don't we want to think about it more? And like, yeah, there's lots of gear and stuff in there, man, but you don't need all the gear. Pick the things that speak to you, leave the rest. You know, and like, yeah, I used a Vortec down here, man, but you could use a double. Any pump you want, man. Like, it's like, think about how all of this stuff comes together and think about the biology. And yeah, it is over-engineered, but no, I'm creating a biotope for an animal that I'm not okay with dying in 12 months. You know, I want it to be around for a long time.
Yeah, and if you can afford and if you can justify to put everything you can to sustain or to give it the best chance of success, why not? Why not? But your budget, you know, obviously determines what equipment you can go with.
Are you ready for the good news?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's more of this to come. Joe is actually here for a whole bunch of episodes, and they're going to be in the 52 playlist, and you're going to see it right here.